Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ned Bellavance, Ned1313 on Twitter, and welcome to the Daily Check-In for June 2nd, 2020. It is my favorite day of the week. It is Terraform Tuesdays, y'all. We're going to be talking about Terraform. Get pumped, get excited. Oh, this feels good. Okay, so we're going to talk about a specific topic within the realm of Terraform. This time, I'm going to be talking about where to store your config data, which is kind of a burning question when it comes to Terraform because you're going to have your Terraform configurations and those configurations need data. So, like, where do you get that data? So, that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. Before I get to that, one housekeeping item, and this is kind of exciting. Actually, two. One, I got over 100 subscribers, so you can now get to my YouTube channel by just going to YouTube/C/Ned in the Cloud. That's it. You don't have to remember any weird strings. I mean, you probably weren't going there directly anyway, but it's nice to have that vanity URL. It makes me feel special, and it's nice to feel special sometimes. The other thing is, if you haven't watched yesterday's episode where I kind of talked about what's going on in the country as a whole and some of the difficulties that are out there, I just want to reiterate, if you have the means to help out, financially, awesome. I put a link in that show, and I'll put it in this one too, to a bunch of organizations that are helping with bail money, because that's going to be a real problem for people who are getting arrested during these riots and protests. More the protests than anything. That's what I'm worried about. But if you can't help financially, you know what? You can be someone who listens and creates a space for people who need to vent, for people who are going through some heavy stuff right now, need someone to talk to. Be that person, listen, don't talk, and just be there to create a space for those who need it. So that's all I'm going to say on that topic for this episode. Before we dive in, I just want to check in with you. I hope you're doing okay. Well, no one's really okay, but I hope you're getting through. I hope you're staying safe. No big issues up near me because I'm about an hour north of Philadelphia, but there's been some crazy stuff going on in Philadelphia. And so I'm obviously concerned for all of those people. And if anybody is in Philadelphia and you need to reach out, hit me up on Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever makes sense for you. I'm happy to listen or provide any help that I can. With that out of the way, let's talk about Terraform, because that's ostensibly why you came today. So when you're building a Terraform configuration, you're going to have variables, so you can submit information to that configuration and build out your resources, whatever they might be. And the question often becomes, how do I submit that configuration data, and where does that configuration data live? It's a good question. And a lot of times when you see examples, there's just a terraform.tf vars file in the same directory, and that's where all the config data lives, or they're submitting it at the command line using -var, which you can do if you're creating like a build pipeline and you can submit parameters as part of that build pipeline. You could override some default parameters by submitting them in the build, but then that's all codified in the build pipeline, which again, you could check into source control, but it might not be the best way to go about it. And it could make it very difficult to look at all of that configuration data holistically and make changes. So where can you store your configuration data? What would make the most sense? I think there's a lot of good options out there. If you've taken my Terraform deep dive course, you know that one of the things that I did for that is actually put my configuration data in DynamoDB. And then I wrote a Lambda function. It's not a very good one, I will admit that, because I don't know how to write in JavaScript, but I cobbled this thing together, and the JavaScript function takes whatever workspace you're currently in and then queries the DynamoDB table for all of the configuration settings that go along with that workspace. It works. It's not ideal necessarily. I'm sure someone could write something way better than what I wrote, but it is one way to query something and get data back. And I used the external provider to do that. So it's just sending an HTTP request to that Lambda, and then the Lambda is responding with properly formatted JSON, which then becomes the configuration data for the deployment. I built this 3 years ago, and I would do it a little differently now, and I'm redoing that course, so I will do it a little differently. How will I go about it? Well, I have some more options now. I thought of new things, or I found new things. One of those is AWS has the SSM parameters, which is generally for server management, but you could also use that to store configuration data about anything. It can store secrets and clear text data. Now, if you really have important secrets, you should probably put those in KMS instead of in the parameter store, but you can store all these different parameters in your parameter store, and then you can use the parameter store as a data source in your Terraform configuration. So the only thing that you'd have to submit as part of the variable would be what the name of the parameter store is, where it can find all of this configuration data. And then the rest of your config lives inside of the parameter store. That seems pretty useful. What else could you use? You could also use Consul, and that's what I'm actually going to show. I'm going to do an actual demonstration for Terraform Tuesday. I got this all prepped ahead of time. I'm going to use Consul because Consul, in addition to doing a lot of other things, has a key value store in it, and you can push items into that key value store and retrieve them, and it's also available as a data source in Terraform. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. If you're not familiar with Consul, go check it out. There's a pretty big push from Terraform. There's a pretty big push from HashiCorp around this right now, but I'm going to go and share out my screen. Okay, so I've got Visual Studio Code up here, and as a sidebar, I've created a repository on my GitHub account that's ned1313 called Terraform Tuesdays, and that's where I'm going to put example code whenever I do examples for Terraform Tuesday, so you can go and run through it yourself and kind of figure out what's going on. So what I have is two files, and actually let me bump up the zoom here so it's a little easier to see. So I have two different files in this dated folder. One's console setup.sh, and the other one is the Terraform configuration. And all console setup does is it downloads whatever the version of console you want. The current, as of this recording, is 1.7.3, so that's what I downloaded. It downloads it, unzips it, and runs console in the background. This is all Linux-based, so you'd have to change some of the commands if you want to run this from PowerShell. But what happens is once you run this, Consul's now running in a browser. If I open up the browser here, let me magnify this a little bit too. That's better. So this is Consul running locally. Right now, if I go to the key value store, there's nothing there. There's no key value pairs. So we want to load it up with our mock configuration data. So let's say we were doing something with VPCs and we wanted to store our VPC configuration data in here. All right, so I'm going to put some configuration data into Consul. And the way you do that is do a curl and put some data into whatever path you want for that key value store. So the path I'm doing is Terraform VPC development, and CIDR range is the key. And the value that I'm putting in there is what's in the data. So this 10.0.0.0/16 is what I'm putting in there. And I'm going to do that for a staging environment and a production environment as well. And you could put a whole bunch of additional keys in that path for subnets and other things, but I'm just putting these basic settings so you can get an idea. So let me copy all these, paste it down here. All right, so I've put those three keys into Consul. If we go back to Consul and do a quick refresh, now we see there's an entry for key value. I can dig into Terraform, I can dig into VPC. There's my three environments, and there's my CIDR range. Boom. All right, awesome. So that's all stored in Consul. We're good to go. Let's go back and look at what's in our Terraform configuration. And like I said, this is like proof of concept, very basic. What did I put in here? I put in variables about how to talk to the Consul server. So I put in the Consul address, which is going to be localhost, the port it's running on, which by default is 8500, and the data center, which when you spin up a dev instance of Consul, the default data center is DC1. So that's all in there. And then we scroll down and I'm defining a provider for Consul. I'm specifying the address based off those two variables. So Consul address and Consul port. So that's how you get to the Consul server. And then this is the data center you should use. All right, so I've got that defined in my provider. The next step is to define a data source for Consul. How are we going to get this information out of Consul? And the way we're going to do that is through this data source called Consul keys. So this lets us pull one or more keys from a Consul data source, and then you define the keys that you want as nested blocks inside this data source. So I'm just pulling one key here, but you could have as many of these key entries as you want for each thing that you need information about in your Consul configuration. The name argument here is what specifies what's the variable name or the path name you want once you've extracted this entry. And we'll see how that's used in a minute. So I went with VPC underscore CIDR. Path is the actual path to the key that you want to get the information from. And default is if you don't find this key, do you want to specify a default value? So for this, I did 10.300/16. So that's everything I set up. And then lastly, for the output, I'm not actually creating any resources with this. I'm just going to expose this as output. And the way that I'm going to do that is you see we've got data.consolekeys.networking. So that was the name of this data source I defined here. And then each key is exposed as a var. So you do var, and then the name of the key, or the name of the variable is defined by this name up here, which you use to reference that value down here. So if this works, I don't have a workspace created yet. So the other thing is in this path, I used the workspace here. So it's going to look at what current workspace I'm using and then dynamically pull the data for that particular workspace. So I'm using a couple different things here. I hope it's not too confusing. So if I go back to here and just simply run a few Terraform commands. So we'll start with, oh, I should go into the right directory or this is not going to work. Okay. If I run Terraform init, it gets the plugins, the usual dance. And now if we run Terraform apply, I haven't created a workspace yet. So it's using the default workspace. All right, so you can see the output is 10.300/16, which shows since it couldn't find the value in the key, it went with the default value that we specified in the configuration. Now let's create a workspace for development and run that. Now we're on the development workspace. So now if we run Terraform apply, it should get the value that's in the key for the development workspace, which see now the output is 10.000/16. So it was able to go grab that value from that key based off of what workspace we're currently using. And obviously you could apply this in a much more grand way and use Consul as the data store for all of your Terraform configurations. And all you have to do is query the right one. So hopefully this was interesting to me. I wanted to set this up real quick and show you how to do it. Again, I'll put a link to the repository in the show notes and everything so you can see where you can go to get this example code and run it yourself. I'm sorry for anybody who's listening to the podcast. This is kind of a visual one, so this might not make a ton of sense to you until you watch the video, but I'll publish it on the podcast anyway. With that, I'm a little bit over time, so thank you for watching today. Thank you for any help you can give to people that are struggling out there. And until tomorrow, stay healthy and stay safe, everybody. Thanks.